Climbing in ranked can be daunting. You can go entire games without taking any good fights and end up in the final few squads with negative net RP. You can look for fights in the mid game when taking rotations only to be thirded, 4th and 5th partied, and you could attempt to go for contests only to get sent straight back to the lobby instantly. Properly contesting a drop spot in the early game introduces some risk in the start, but when done right, increases your overall RP gain and how fast you can climb your rank in Apex Legends Season 13 and onwards, as well as make you feel more safe when you're playing out the rest of the game since you aren't sitting on a negative net RP for the majority of the game. It's especially useful if you are a solo queue player since you have the highest impact available of the outcome of a fight at the start of the game where loot is all over the place, teams are scattered, and there's just more space to try to force some plays. So let's dive straight into it and start off with the drop. As with a lot of things in Apex Legends, contesting isn't necessarily about the gunfight as much as it is about positioning or rotations. When you're in the dropship, you want to look for teams that are contesting each other, especially near the edge of the map where there aren't clustered POIs, such as around Lava Fissure or Thermal on World's Edge. What you do next depends on where you're dropping and where exactly the enemy teams are dropping. The farther away they drop from each other, the longer it will take until they actually fight and give you an opening to push in and clean up. If the enemy team seems to drop right on top of each other, you want to land within the same point of interest, about a stone's throw away, so you can quickly pick up a gun and roll in with whatever you found. The best timing is when they start engaging each other and there are knocks on both sides. If they drop on opposite sides each on a larger POI, they'll probably end up not fighting. And you can't really contest either of these teams directly since you getting third partied by the other factor is very high, so your best bet is looking for a smaller POI or a no-name loot area like the no-name between Overlook and Fragment, or Countdown or Staging. These are all perfect spots to quickly loot up, get decent loot, and then roll in to fight the other teams when they finally engage each other. Abusing early third parties is a great way to quickly get ahead in the early game with a little bit of loot, kill points, and momentum. But what if there aren't any good third party contests to take? What if you're landing in your favorite spot and another team decides to contest you? If you are fighting on drop, it's important to have a good idea of what's happening around you. Are there any other teams dropping nearby to third party? If so, you should just steer clear of a fight. Try to land far away from the enemy team in a manner where the contester is between you and the third party, and then you can either loot up and rotate out, or sit around and wait to see if the other teams end up fighting each other. If nobody's close enough to make the third party play, you'll want to drop as smartly as possible. I know this sounds really obvious, so let me elaborate. Every drop site has one or several positions with very high tier loot, and there's usually one side or position that's more favorable than the other when it comes to team fighting, usually high grounds with decent cover. If you want to contest a team and you get a chance to choose, go for the place with the best loot, ideally spreading out as much as possible with a combination of high tier loot drops and good positioning drops to deny the enemy team as much of the loot and control of the POI as possible. If you can successfully cut a team off of, let's say, 70% of the POI, by the law of averages, you're probably going to win the contest. And if 70% of you guys watching this video would hit the like button, we'd be winning YouTube, so please do that. I have the perfect POI to demonstrate the excellent example of taking space and loot, and that's going to be on Climatizer. There's a very clear divide with the massive lava rift between the two houses, but if possible, you actually want to drop on top of the bridge in the middle. It cuts away the contesting team's rotations and gives you access to plenty more loot as well. If the enemy team tries to push you, they must run across open ground without much or any cover, exposing themselves to you and your teammates' line of sight. Something that many teams do wrong is dropping at the very edge of the point of interest, and while this gives you a chance to run away, you're limiting yourself with space and inviting the enemy team to surround you on landing and just completely starve you off loot. Whichever team is first to land sets the pace for the contest and can decide how they want to land. Now there is a little bit of a power dynamic here, as the team landing first does get the dibs on the best places to loot, on account of them just landing faster and, you know, getting the loot faster. You know, if you land on them, you're gonna die. But if they spread too thin or one of their teammates turns into a delicious solo target, odds are that the contesting team will land on top of them or around them to punish and kill them. If you're dropping first, always know that this is a possibility and keep your eyes on enemy teams so you can veer off if they decide to land on you. There's also a few reasons not to drop right near your teammate, and this is another standard massive throw. Again, try to split off your teammates and take as much loot and space as possible. If you land on each other, you're giving up a lot of control of the area, and you're denying each other loot that you easily could have. When you're deciding where exactly you want to drop, you want to make sure that you land straight on some type of loot to be ready if anything happens right off rip. If you have the chance, go for loot pockets that are already spawned on the ground rather than the loot bins. This lets you plan ahead while you're approaching the loot and gets you geared up faster than if you have to roll the dice on a loot bin. This is especially true if you're getting straight landed on with someone tossing the dice on the floor. Instead of you both staring at the bin and spamming the interact key, you could already have a weapon in hand while they're opening the bin and get some easy damage in, or maybe even a knock. So now that we've established the drop meta, what do you do once you're on the ground? Now this is very dependent on your own skill, your teammate's skill, and your enemy's perceived skill, along with your loot and the legends you are running. If you have an aggressive composition with good movement and feel comfortable in forcing a fight, you can either rush into the enemy team or try to take a high ground or favorable position against where they currently are at to whittle them down and deny them their own loot by constantly keeping their loot path in your line of sight. Eventually maybe getting enough damage to push in and clean them out. A passive or defensive composition that might be running, say, a caustic doesn't have it as easy, but despite your kit, setting up is rarely a good idea unless you're expecting a third party to come in. If you bunker up as a caustic and you hide indoors, the attacking team has a way higher chance of winning the fight because they are the engagers, and the game favors the engagers. Besides that, there's also a huge risk of you drawing the fight out long enough that everyone in the POI just ends up dying to the third party anyways. If you choose to bunker up, the enemy teams usually decide to cut their losses and rotate elsewhere, but if they do end up forcing a fight, always keep an eye on your enemy's position, and if one gets a little bit too greedy, a little bit too close, and separated from their teammates, pounce right on them and you'll get a free pick. Another piece of valuable knowledge is knowing your power spikes. Some legends are very strong for early team fights since their tacticals are just that useful, and some need their ultimates before they're of good use to their own team. A well-placed Horizon ultimate is a win condition in a clean 3v3, so you should always keep that in mind. But power spikes don't only apply to legends. Despite being weak in the mid to late game, several guns are absolutely amazing off drop, especially if they're combined with the right attachments. If you get these guns or the combinations, odds are you'll have a leg up on the enemy team who might be choosing to go for the more meta weapons for the mid game. Some guns that are amazing off drop without any attachments are the Wingman, Rampage, Peacekeeper, Bowcheck, and some marksman or sniper rifles if your squint game is really strong. Weapons like the Havoc with a turbocharger, the RE45, the P2020 or Mozambique with hammer points, or the Rampage with the Thermites hit their power spike if you find one item and will absolutely destroy enemies that haven't found good armors yet. If you find a Thermite, hammer points, or turbocharger, make sure to bring them with you just in case you find one of those weapons to get a huge advantage in the early firefights. Also, by the way guys, check out this graph and make sure to hit the subscribe button so we can hit 500,000 subs. It really helps. Thank you. A decent weapon is important, but armors can be even more critical in some situations. You want to look for blue or purple armors so you don't have to fight in your tidy whiteys. All of that being said, having good weapons to win a contest is great, but you can still win a contest with real bottom tier loot, if any at all, as long as your teammates have decent loot and frag out themselves. You can apply a ton of pressure or rotations just by existing near your teammates, which you can't if you're busy looting across the POI when they end up fighting. And that being said, if you finish looting and all of you and your teammates have white armor without any good weapons or supplies, you can still run away. Fighting a contest is good, but if you don't have anything, there is no point in forcing it, and you should try to rotate away so you can loot up before they close the gap on you and make it impossible to leave. If the enemy team decides to set up on a strong high ground without moving and just continuing to poke you, you could try running around the POI looking for loot. Just make sure that they don't randomly push one of you. If they continue sitting on the god spot, you have to decide whether you want to siege them or just run away. Their goal is to make you push them, since they rely on their stronger position to get an edge on your team. If you have good resources, you can punish their lack of resources, because that's what they give up by camping, to win. But it will be hard if you are on equal footing. When push comes to shove and you start fighting, normal teamfight rules apply. But always remember that you want to dish out good damage and help your teammates, but it is still crucial never to get knocked. If you get cracked or take a lot of damage, consider dropping back and shielding up, or just playing behind your teammates so you don't leave them to hang dry in the fight. If you get knocked, you lose a lot of control of the outcome of the fight, and you make it a lot more favorable to third party. When a fight is done, resetting is key. Quickly grab armors from enemies' death boxes and heal up while looking around as to see if any team might be moving up on you. If any of your teammates are knocked, make sure to drop an armor for them out of the death boxes so they quickly can grab a life vest just in case, and then cover for them while you are all healing up. If you want to learn how to loot really quick, including armor swaps, and you want a lot more looting tips, check out the video on the screen. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.